Hello everybody, welcome back. I'm the Strategy Professor, and today we're going to be looking at our jungle tier list for 11.4. So as always, if you enjoy the content, please be sure to like and subscribe. It really helps out a ton on the channel. Come by, check out the stream. Usually starts around midnight Eastern Standard Time, goes till about 3 or 4 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Very friendly, chill community. We'd love to have you. And then if you like this, we have tons of other patch notes and guides for each fresh patch. And then we have lots of individual champion guides, topical guides like best one trick, how to macro better, how to micro better, coaching sessions, and dozens of other guides and content on the channel. So be sure to check all that out, like and subscribe. Couple clicks. It's easy, simple, really helps out a ton. Okay, let's go ahead and get in here. So they are changing the jungle, and it's difficult to predict exactly what this is going to do to the meta. Overall, there have been sort of two schools of thought. I've heard some people say that we're going to go back towards a super heavy, like level 2, level 3, just like turbo gank. It's like perma gank junglers, like your Lee Sins, your Xin Zhaos, your Jarvans. And the thought process there, I believe, is that the camps just aren't really worth anything. So it's a lot better just to get your laners ahead. And to see if you can get golden experience off of kills and pushing waves and things like that. But then another school of thought is that you're going to see the rise of more like tank junglers that function on very low gold. So both of these, the premise is you're going to have less XP, you're going to have less gold. So how can you be most useful? Early ganking or having cheaper items that can be really effective with less gold. And some of these champions that are going to be on the tier list are going to be both of those. They're good at early ganking, and they're very good with almost no items, like Rammus, or Udyr, or Skarner. But those are kind of the schools of thought. I tend to think it's going to be more utility tanks, because that's where the meta was already going. It's just really all about the Chem tank, plus the Dead Man's Plate. They did nerf Dead Man's a couple of patches ago, but that's still where the meta has been. If you look at the win rates over the last patch, you still see a lot of those kind of Chem tank abusers, Udyr, Rammus, and Skarner, all like pushing 55%. So those are like some of the highest win rate champions right now. In fact, they literally are those three. So, and then Nunu's down there too. I think he's pretty good. He has a different item set, but it's really all about the, like I said, the Chem Tank Deadman's phase rush on it. At least on Udyr uses phase rush. I guess the other two don't. But anyways, I think this is just going to reinforce whoever's already strong in the jungle. So at the very top, I don't think it's going to shake up a lot. But in kind of the B tier and the C tier, you might see a little bit more. As far as the patch notes themselves, I don't think they touch anything that's going to pertain to jungle too much. Moonstone is going to affect Ivern a little bit. It's going to knock down the healing maybe by 6 or 7% or something, so that will matter to some extent. Leah was getting Moonstone. It was far worse than Leandri's on her, so it shouldn't affect too many champs there. Everfrost I don't think matters for most junglers. Cosmic Drive's actually a little interesting, because I think this could be a great Shyvana item, AP Shyvana, which I don't know what the win rate was, but I've seen some of those do okay. She does require a lot of gold, but she also like farms super fast, so she might be able to, and she takes dragons and Rift and things like that really fast, so I don't know. She might be a little bit of a special case. We'll see. But this would just be so nice on her, excuse me, getting the permanent 10 to 30 movement speed and then basically getting an extra 20 ability haste. Now, you do have to already have 160 ability power to do it. So I know on support you can do it like mandate into this. So I think you could do Night Harvester into this and probably be okay. You'd be not getting Nashor's Tooth if you do that, though. So I don't know. It probably won't matter that much, but there might be some champs where this could be really interesting. Ginsu's not good on any of the mainstream champs. I don't even think like Master Yi was getting this very often, so that's probably not going to matter. These things, the extra grievous wounds, that will affect champions that get Gore Drinker and champions that have just a lot of innate healing like Mundo and things like that, just because more people are going to opt to upgrade to the 60% grievous now, especially on Mortal Reminder and Morellonomicon. The ADC buffs aren't going to matter too much. Samira's going to be in the dirt, so anyone that like has a long-range engage, like a Sejuani or something, is going to like that a little bit, because she can't win wall your missile engage. There aren't going to be a ton of those in the meta. I think it's going to be mostly like melee tanky type of champs, but a couple of champs won't like that. Kaiser is getting her damage hit a little bit, but she's still going to be a terror. You really need to be able to access the back line to lock down things like Kaiser and Vayne. who are going to be very strong. Skarner does take a very slight nerf. Okay, whatever. So he's going to have like 20 less base HP and then 5 less. So at level 6, he's going to have like 50 less HP. That does matter. That's going to bring down his health by like 7 or 8%. I still think he'll be pretty good. Don't think these other ones are going to matter too much as far as... we've got a Muumuu. Gets a slight buff. I still think it's going to be too hard for him. Just his items have been nerfed too much. His ultimate got knocked down from 2 seconds to 1 second. It's still 150 second cooldown. So I just think he's going to be in a pretty bad place still. Okay, let's go ahead and get in here. So Udyr, this shouldn't really come as a surprise to anybody. He just does too much right now with Phoenix stance. They did nerf him a while ago to where his Phoenix only does 275 instead of 300, but that's still too much. Like the pulse does every third hit still does the 300. It's just the dot damage over time, and he's just too good with the meta items right now with the Chem Tank plus Dead Man's, and then he just gets Phase Rush and Swiftness, and you just cannot get away from him. You can't kite him. He just runs all over the map, takes all the farm. He can duel people reasonably well. He can take a lot of hits just off of those items. So yeah, I just think that he just does way too much. He's just too difficult to stop. It takes too many resources to take him down, and you just cannot get away from him. He just runs around in bear form and just stuns everybody, just over and over and over again, and then just like spams Phoenix, and it's just too much to handle. So they need to nerf him again. If they don't, then he's just going to continue to take over. He's even seeing some pro play. Now, his pro play win rate is not as high, but in solo queue, it's still super high. And he is banned like 40 or 50% of the time now. As you can see on the charts, people, the win rate really didn't go anywhere for the last 2 weeks. It's been about the same, but like the play rate just skyrocketed once pros started playing it. And the ban rate subsequently went up a ton. So he was good for a little. I know some people are like, oh, he's been good for years. It's a very, very specific set of circumstances that has been around since the preseason-ish. It took people a couple weeks to figure out about it, but he has not been this overpowered for like 3 years, right? Like, it's very specific stuff. It's the Phoenix stance got buffed by an insane amount. It got like plus 75 damage on it back in December, I think. And then they buffed Chem Tank a ton. They knocked 400 gold off of the cost. And then Dead Man's ended up getting movement speed on it. So it has less armor, but it has more movement speed and still has the same damage. And then they ended up buffing, I think they buffed Boots of Swiftness during the preseason as well, or maybe it was at the very end of last season. But it's this confluence of all of these things coming together, and Phase Rush has been buffed numerous times for melee champs. And it's not just that it gives you the 40 to 60% movement speed for 3 seconds, but it also makes you 75% slow resist. So basically you can just run through like a Nivea or anything else that's supposed to slow you. You just run straight through it. Wither from Nasus. Any of that type of stuff, you're just going to run straight through it. So it's been multiple different things that have changed that have enabled this. And just the camps, the meta has just been turbo farming the camps over and over and over again. And yes, that is going to get hurt a little bit, but he doesn't need that many items, right? He's pretty good just by himself with his base stats. He's got a decent amount of effectiveness because he's so fast and he's got that, stun that can hit multiple targets. But then also, once he gets Chem Tank, that's good enough to really start running around and tearing people up. So he doesn't need a lot of items. He can gank early. He can duel. He can fight at least a good chunk of enemy junglers early. He farms super fast. So he's kind of do it all. Definitely overpowered. I think he's going to be the number 1 on anyone's tier list that's reasonable on this patch. Okay, and then I have Rammus up here. Now, Rammus might be a little sneakier. There might be some people that will not have Rammus on there, and you may not see Rammus in like Masters Plus, but lower than that, even in Diamond, I think he's probably okay. His win rate is just deceptively very high. It's 54.5%, and he has similar qualities to Udyr in that he's going to be a Chem Tank user, Chem Tank Deadman's. But he's very good against a lot of the other AD champions out there. And that's really where he starts to shine, is he just completely shuts them down with his W. He's just so tanky, and he gets so much extra armor with all of this stuff that... And so many people just overload on AD. They might only have one AP threat on their team, because almost everyone's playing AD tops, and there's still a lot of AD junglers. You'll still see people playing Kane and Lee Sin and, you know, stuff like that just because that's what they love to play. And Rammus just really shuts that down. And he's so good at early game ganks, too. He's always been good at that, right? Rolling up with his Q. But now, if you do the Q max, which is what people have been doing, you can get that cooldown down to 6 seconds. And then once you get the CDR off of the Kim Tank, you know, it's going to come down to 4 or even 5 seconds, depending on your secondary items that you get. Or, yeah, 5 or 4 seconds. But yeah, surprisingly, he actually performs really well over time. As you saw, the Udyr chart was upper left to bottom right. This is, you know, bottom left to upper right, which is the way you want to be going with it. And yeah, like I said, he just synergizes super well with stack a hell of a lot of armor and get a Thornmail, and that just shuts down so much of the meta right now. With the turbo ganks, he farms reasonably well, like the Raptors, and some of the bigger camps, you know, like the red and the blue, he doesn't take as fast. Stuff like Dragon, he's not going to be able to solo super well, but he does take a lot of those pesky, annoying little camps like the Raptors and Wolves pretty safely in the early game. They are planning on reworking his R to where he can jump over minions and like slam people eventually. I don't know when they're doing that. They teased it like a couple of patches ago. But nevertheless, still going to be a super strong item, still the same kind of items that you get on him. He's just going to be a really excellent choice, especially if they have a lot of armor and auto attackers on their team. Okay. And then Skarner did get directly nerfed on this patch, but I still think that he's going to be phenomenal as well. He's part of the triple threat here of the Kim Tank users. If you look at the win rates now, Rammus and Skarner are also like completely off the radar, by the way. So for some reason, people just do not like to play these champs. Like everyone knows about Udyr, right? High pick rate, high ban rate, but because pros aren't really playing much Skarner and Rammus, they're totally off the radar. So you can play these every single game. No one bans them, no one picks them. It's 3% pick rate, less than a 1% ban. I guess Rammus is banned 6% of the time, but you're just going to get these guys every time if you want them. So this is one where what people are actually picking does not align with what's actually powerful right now in the meta for the most part. They're right about Udyr. They're sort of right about Hecarim in the sense that I think Hecarim's tier 2, but he still is very good. But then they're just way off, I think, on like Graves, Viego, Kane, Lee. That's just people playing what they want to play, just what they enjoy playing, not necessarily what's actually going to be strong. So, and these champions line up super well, like I just said before, right? Anything that's going to be going this Kim Tank, Thornmail type of build, especially Rammus, lines up exceptionally well against all of these champs. I mean, what is this? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. The 6 most popular champions are all AD, right? I mean, Udyr is not, but 6 of the 7 are all AD. So anyways, that's why I think that Rammus is there, and that's why Skarner is going to be there too. Farms up pretty well, uses Phase Rush, you know, the same drill, Kim Tank, Dead Man's Plate, Swiftness. He clears reasonably well, does a decent amount of damage. He does have some options. You don't have to do Kim Tank. That is one of the higher win rate options. If your team needs more damage, you can do Trinity or you can do Divine Sunder. But pretty much just need for speed, and then you have that ultimate to pull them back into your team. You've got potential for AoE stuns with your E. They changed his E, I think, during the preseason. He also has the bottom left to upper right, so he scales way better than Udyr does, at least statistically. He's on par with Rammus. But they changed his E. I don't remember when it was, but it was not too long ago, to where I don't think it slows down anymore when it hits people. It goes full speed. It used to slow down to like 50% missile speed when it hit somebody, so it was very difficult to hit multiple people with your E. And what your E does is if you hit people with it, it puts a big slow on them, 30 to 50%. And then if you auto-attack them, it stuns them for 1.25 seconds. So it's kind of like a triggered Udyr Bear stance to some extent, right? It's ranged, but it's a skill shot. You have to hit it, and people have to line up. So Udyr's Bear stance is more consistent. But you have this stun, and you also have your R, which is single target. You lock them down, pull them back into your team, and they're dead. So that makes him excellent at locking down stuff like Vayne or like Kaiser. They have to get a Quicksilver Sash, or they're just not going to be able to deal with it. So that's a pretty big tax. So yeah, pretty solid. His like pre-6 ganks aren't as good as Rammus or Udyr. You can, if you just run up and you're able to get him with Fracture, it can be okay. But anyways, I still think he's worthy of S-Class, just a little bit lower in my opinion than Udyr and Rammus, but still going to be strong. And then old trusty Nunu, you know, he doesn't get a lot of the powerhouse items, but he pretty much has Kim Tank on his W, to some extent, right? Like, you just get to roll right up. The big trouble with Rammus or Nunu, one of them is that if they have tanks on their team, they can block for the squishy champs, and you don't have very good backline access, because once your snowball goes down, you don't have a lot of extra movement speed. People do take phase rush, and that does help out some. But it's going to be hard to get on the Vayne or the Kaiser or whatever, you know, backline threat is going on out there. So that is my one gripe with him, is that if they do have one of those turbo-fed champs and you can't get a really good flank and they have a smart tank on the front line that's just going to soak that snowball for you, that can be bad. But he does bring so much utility as well on top of just sort of the raw gank potential and the tank potential. He's got the Q, which pretty much allows him to secure any objective, right? Unless they CC you, you can just Q plus... you can just Q plus... Sorry, let me shut this off. Is Q plus smite, and unless they CC you, then you're going to be able to deal with that really well. You're going to secure the objective. And it also gives him some extra healing in combat. Now, yes, there are more grievous wounds, so that is a little bit less effective than it was in Season 10. But it's still pretty decent. He farms reasonably well, stays pretty healthy. They did hit his base HP a couple of patches ago, but he's still doing fine. He does have a lot of slows. Now, remember, if you're against another phase rush user, they're going to just be able to ignore your slows once they trigger phase rush. So that is very annoying against Nunu. But against, you know, other non-phase rush champs, he does have a very effective assortment of slows. And your passive, Blood Boil, don't forget, is very nice for giving usually your AD carry 10% extra movement speed and giving them some extra attack speed. I don't remember how much it is. But that's good, you know, for helping your Vayne kite out the Udyr running after them. And stuff like that. That certainly can help out. So, aside from the Chem Tank, he is going to get the other assortment of items, usually Dead Man's into Thornmail, or maybe Spirit Visage. You do have your own self-heal, so that is pretty nice for the Spirit Visage. But, anyways, same drill, super tanky, just run at him, disrupt. Gonna be good. Okay, then we're dropping down. Now, all of these champs, once again, they don't really need a lot of items, right? Once they get Chem Tank, it's off to the races, and their other items are fairly cheap when you think about, like, Dead Man's. And then once they have Chem Tank and Deadmans, they really don't need much more than that. They can get a Bramble Vest, maybe a Thornmail, but they don't need a lot to be very effective. And then we have, down into the A-list, we've got Hecarim. So I have Hecarim a little bit lower. I think some people overvalue this guy. Like, he is pretty good, but he does require some expensive items early on. So he has to get Divine Sunder. And then usually it's going to be Sterix after that for 3,100. So it's nice once you get both of these. I mean, he's actually surprisingly squishy in the early game before you get the Sterix, right? Because he doesn't have a defensive steroid. He has his W, which allows you to heal for a certain percentage of damage that your team deals to people in the circle. But there's a lot of healing reduction out there. And it's just not very much in the early game. And it's on a very long cooldown, so you're only going to be able to do it once per fight. So he does have some good early game ganks, right? With your E and your Q, I'd say it's on par with like Rammus and Udyr. It's just that you're a lot squishier than those champions are in the early game. Your first item and second item are going to be far more expensive than those two items are. So he does scale really well moving forward with levels, and then once he gets like Death Stance and Sterix and Sunder, and he can kind of heal and get a billion shields, it's all good, but that is one main problem. So one benefit of him, though, versus, you know, the S-Class crew, is he has some of the best access to the back line in the game, right? You just straight charge through everything on the front unstoppably and just get right on that back line and start disrupting the Vayne or the Kaiser. So that's something that Udyr and Rammus can't do as easily, and Nunu, people can just go up and kind of body block and sort of disrupt you a little bit, but he really breaks those kind of formations open. He's very, very good at flanking, but he can also just run it right up the middle if he's strong enough and if you have enough backup. And that synergizes very well with a lot of other champs, especially if you have like a Galio on your team or a Shen or something like that that can get on top of you and follow you in. Then that's a pretty potent combo. So anyways, I think he's going to be pretty strong. He does actually fall off pretty hard late game after his first item, as you can see. So you do need to try to close out early. There is that extra pressure, and that's part of why I have him down a little bit lower. So I think he's slightly overrated, but not much. I think a lot of people will have him S-Class. What does Lowlytics have him as? They have him at S-. I don't put the minuses in there. I'm not sure exactly what that is. What tier do they have him in? Okay, so he's basically like tier 2 or something, but that's not too far off. He's good. Okay, Ivern is another one. Now, this one is very, very skill dependent. Ivern is one of the hardest junglers in the game to play because you have to have a really good sense of tempo. Like, how long do you have between when you tag your camp and when you can run around and gank and then come back, and you have to path around the enemy jungle because you do not want to fight them most of the time in the early game. So you have to kind of predict where they're going to be at what time and, get your camps accordingly, because you do not want them to come over and start counter jungling your camps, because after you use your little magic on them, if they come over and counter jungle it before you get to cash that in, that feels absolutely terrible. So there is the skill factor there. But then also, kind of like the tanks, he functions extremely well on low gold, except he gets enchanter items, which are even cheaper than tank items. So you can just get the Moonstone, get the Staff of Flowing Water, or the Putrefier, or Redemption, or whatever, plus Ionian Boots, and you're just going to be super effective, right? Just like most enchanters, you don't need a lot of gold. So I think he is going to benefit in this new environment if you can play him well, and if you have a team comp that can support him. So you really need some kind of tank or engage or just something from either top lane or your support in order to play this well, I think. If you have another enchanter bottom, I feel like that's kind of bad because the Moonstone does work together, but Staff of Flowing Water does not. Like, you can't get multiple stacks of this. It's a unique passive. It's called Rapids, so you can't, that doesn't stack if everybody gets that. Moonstone does, because it's not... Actually, it is named, but if multiple people have it, I think it still triggers. Not 100% about that, but I think it still triggers because it's a buff on you that buffs up other people. So, you can't have multiple Moonstone Renewers, but I think other people can. But anyway, so they are nerfing Moonstone a little bit. They did directly nerf Ivern a couple of patches ago. He is weird. Not a lot of people play him. Not a lot of people are good on him. But I think that if you are good on him, then he definitely can fit into the meta as long as, the stars align and it's a good pick. Okay, Fiddlesticks. Now, I'm not 100% about Fiddle. He does have a high win rate right now. On the one hand, he does like expensive items, right? He likes having Night Harvester. Now, Zhonya's is kind of cheap, though, at 2,600, so he could be all right with Zhonya's. Demonic Embrace is pretty good, but I think most people probably go Zhonya since you're going to be on more of a budget. But he also, so he does like items that are expensive, but he also has a lot of baseline effectiveness in that, his Fear, just point click, do a really strong disable that can't be dodged. Then you've got your Silence, and then of course your ultimate does scale really well with items, but it also just does a hell of a lot of damage by itself. It's something like 900 damage at level 6, even without any AP. So he's kind of that rare combination of really high base damage and really high base effectiveness and really high scaling. Now, you do have to be careful against some of these tanks. It's going to be very hard to kill them if they get Mercury Treads, and a lot of them can opt into Force of Nature, which did get buffed a couple of patches ago. So if they do get Force of Nature, that's a problem. That will stop them from getting Deadmans, though, if you do that. So I think it is nice if you're going to go for a damage dealer in the jungle that you do go for an AP champion just to try to run them off of, the trifecta of items there, the Kim Tank into Deadmans into Thornmail, just to make that, just don't let them get those items, force them to get a Force of Nature and diversify, and that will help your AD carry out a little bit. It's because they won't have as much armor. So I just think he's really useful. Like I said, just baseline usefulness. Even if you're behind, you still have the chance for a Miracle Ultimate. You still have the Fear. You still do a ton of damage. So he is pretty good, although once again the tanks can be a little problematic because it's difficult to kill them, and they can just run at you and root you out of wherever your sniper nest is, where you're looking to come in with your ult. Okay. Kha'zix is another one, and I'm not super sure about this one. He does have a high win rate right now, and he is very popular. So he's going to have a very hard time later against stuff like Rammus, I think. But he does have that backline access where if he gets really fed, he should be able to bypass the tanks and just get on the Vayne or the Kaiser and blow them up. And just kind of work from there. So, and I think that he doesn't need as much gold as some of the other champs do. Like his Q, he does have nice scaling, but his Q just does so much damage against isolated targets. Even without a ton of scaling in it, just if he has Duskblade, it's just kind of off to the races. So he doesn't need a ton of items to like really start taking over games. It's nice if he has it, but he's pretty effective just by himself too, I think. I'm not a Kha'zix expert, but that's why I have him just a little bit higher than a lot of other assassins. See, even off of just one item, he's already, you know, clocking in at like 54%. And then once he goes up to here, it's like 60 and then 65%. So I think that indicates that he has pretty high baseline effectiveness. So he farms the solo camps really well. He can take dragons and barons super fast later on in the game. And it's just that invisibility and the resets and your capacity to get in the back and, you know, just wipe out the mage or wipe out the AD carry before anyone figures out what's going on. So that's it for Kha'zix. I think he's super strong. And then Jarvan is... now, let me see Kha'zix before we move on to Jarvan here real quick. Because I do want to try to keep this... I'm trying to, like, bring the time down on the videos a little bit here. But what is his matchup against some of the... yeah, the powerhouse crew, he is a little bit weaker, right? Like Skarner, Udyr, and Rammus are all not great matchups for him. So you do have to be careful with that. And that is, you know, that's a risky trio to not be great against. Now, fortunately, a lot of people are not playing, and Fiddlesticks as well. Fortunately, not a lot of people are playing the Skarner and the Rammus, so that's good. But you got to make sure you ban Udyr for sure, and then just hope that they don't pick Skarner or Fiddle. But yeah, against anything else, even against Nunu, he's okay. But against everything else, he has a positive win rate. And I think, yeah, his positive win rate, especially against some of the, like, the really popular champs, he does very well. Like Lee Sin, he does very well into that. Does very well into Kane. So against the powerful champs, not so great. But against the popular champs, does pretty well. So the less informed the enemy is, the more successful you're going to be. And then Jarvan is one that I think is going to have a little bit of a breakout on this patch. We'll see. I don't know that he could be tier 3, but I'm just going to tentatively put him at the bottom of tier 2. And this is just kind of a hedge in case we do go to that early game meta where he is just like turbo ganking. He is one of the best level 2 sort of gankers with his flag and drag. And he does a lot of base damage, especially with red, like has, you know, really high AD and things like that in the early game. Sorry, let me fix that camera there. I don't know why it's tripping out. But anyways, so yeah, he does have that, so he can turbo gank early, but he also has some pretty nice utility he can bring later on. So he's got his Q, which is armor shred, up to 26% armor shred. So against those tanks that are just stacking a hell of a lot of armor, that's going to be very nice. It helps out your AD carry if you can do that. I'm not sure how that stacks with Last Whisper. I think it probably stacks multiplicatively rather than additively. But nevertheless, it is going to increase the damage a lot, especially on heavy armor targets. And then you've got your E, which is going to give everyone some extra attack speed. Once again, great buff for your AD carry or any other ranged attacker. And then you have your R, which is fantastic at keeping some of these, primarily Vayne, locked up. If you can get on her and she doesn't flash it, she can't tumble out of it. Although she can pin you against it. If you go in there, she can use her Condemn to, you know, push you into your own terrain. But she's still not going to be able to go anywhere in fights. Or if you can lock down, just if you're against like a Lulu or Soraka, or just things that don't have like blinks to get out of it, then that does have a lot of really good uses, because you can't Quicksilver Sash it, you can't... It's a piece of CC that is unique, that's difficult to get out of, and it does combo together with a lot of the really good stuff that I mentioned with Hecarim earlier, right? Like you've got Galio can ult on top of you, any sort of AoE mage, if you dunk a bunch of people, you have like an Orianna ball on you or something, that's pretty good. It just changed together, like Misfortune being able to channel her ult. It changed together with a lot of these kind of wombo combo type of team comps. And he's sort of flexible too, in that he can build tanky, but then he can also build to do a ton of damage. So people right now are just kind of going Gore Drinker on him. Although the Frostfire Gauntlet does have a higher win rate, and I still think that Kim Tank could be okay. Just lets you just roll up on him and then ult him. could be pretty nice. And he can also take Black Cleaver, and this works so well because he already shreds armor, and this is going to give him even more armor shred. So he might be the answer to something like Udyr. I mean, Udyr and Skarner are great examples too. You just dunk them with Jarvan, and you build tanky, and then they can't get out of it. A lot of them take Ghost. I mean, sometimes they take Flash. I guess Skarner's going to take Flash. But if they don't have Flash, you just dunk them, you know, for 3.5 seconds, and everyone just, like, you know, you just shred their armor with Black Cleaver in your queue, and everyone just open season just guns them down because they can't run around anymore. Good thing against Rammus too. So he might actually be like a pretty good meta breaker champ. But I haven't seen it proven yet. So he might end up being S-class on this patch, but I'm going to put him in tier 2. And, you know, now that I'm thinking about it more and more, like, he does seem like a very good answer in theory to those champions. Although they will probably beat him up one-on-one. It could help your team out a lot in 5v5s, just being able to shut them up and just let the rest of your team take them out before they run away too much. So that's pretty good. So yeah, Cleaver could be good, or Sterix is going to buy you more time. Sterix is really good if you're going to go for the Gore Drinker, but if you're going for like Frostfire or Kim Tank, you might consider going Cleaver instead. But yeah, very unique champ, brings a lot to the table. He's been extremely good in years past. He just kind of fell off the radar for a while. He just didn't have great items and rune combinations. Okay, then getting down into B tier, and there's just a few of these I'll talk about. Now, once again, as I said in the last patch, you might see Yuumi, you might be wondering about Yuumi. That's just Viego. This particular tier list did not have Viego in it, and I didn't want to make my own tier list just to deal with that. It takes a lot of time. I did it for the item video, but we're just going to have Yuumi stand in it for Viego. But here are some of the other ones. So I think Cho'gath is another one that is probably overlooked a little bit. I don't know why his win rate isn't as high. I guess he's not as consistent as some of the other ones, but I think he would also be a very good dead man's Kim Tank user, right? You just roll up at him, you get the slow, you start auto-attacking, Q them while they're slowed, silence them, chomp them, probably dead. You know, against a lot of squishies. If you don't remember the Righteous Glory Cho'gath days of yore, right, like 2 or 3 years ago where that was a thing. It has been nerfed since then, but I still think the premise is pretty good in that it gives you that backline access, and one of the big problems with Cho is you have to hit the skill shot, right? But this takes that out of the equation. Because now you can just roll up, get the slow, and unless they have a flash or a dash, then you're going to hit them with the Q. So I think there are some options there. Once again, I'm not sure why he's had a really high win rate in top lane. He's been like 54, 55% for several patches. But he just hasn't really made it in the jungle. So maybe his clear is just too slow compared to some other ones. Maybe his ganks are just too bad. It does look like his win rate goes up quite a bit. So once he gets like some items, he does start to kind of go through the roof. Yeah, a lot of people go for this Frostfire Gauntlet. I still think the Kim Tank is the way to go. I'm not, because like when you're attacking with your E, you're already applying a slow, like a 50% slow to them. So I think like once you're on top of them, I don't think that's a problem. I think you got stickiness. I think the problem is just getting to them. So I would much rather take the Kim Tank. But yeah, just a bunch of items. He has some nice utility too. He's got that knock up, which gets around tenacity, as the silence, which is a pretty big cone. It's very annoying to deal with. And then of course he has his true damage chomp, which is great for when people get low or against, you know, squishy targets. Being able to chomp them like those 80 carries, it can do a lot of damage. So I think Cho is kind of sleeper. You know, maybe he deserves to be a little bit lower in tier 2. That's totally possible, but I think he's somewhere in the realm of viability. Okay, and then Poppy I actually have up a little bit higher than I usually would, and I think it's, once again, I think that she's going to be a pretty good user of these items, and she almost always has a pretty good win rate, but she's pretty much only played by one tricks. It's like less than 1% play rate, so you got to keep that in mind. So I think she can do Kim Tank. Yeah, Kim Tank's good on her. So you just Kim Tank, roll up on him, get the angle, tackle him into a wall if you can, or at least push him back into your team. Once you get the slow, great with Deadmans. And so her thing, though, that she brings that's unique compared to some of the other champs is her W, of course, to be able to stop movement. So if you can just get on top of something like a Vayne or a Kaiser, it's very difficult for them to get away from you. So I just think against a lot of the mobility champs out there, she can definitely be a pretty good move. Now, I think that Udyr's lunge off of his bear stance does not count as a movement ability, so I don't think that one stopped. Good against Jarvan's flag and drag. But just her anti-mobility potential is pretty nice. And then, of course, you have your ultimate, which, if used properly, can completely turn fights in your favor, right? If you just knock a key person out of the fight and then just get a kill or two before they can get back into the fight, this is going to be pretty big. So, pretty challenging to get the right angle on your ultimate to, you know, come from the right angle and make sure that you're tackling them into your team or into the wall. But nevertheless, I think she has some potential. Her Q does a decent amount of max health damage if people stand in it the whole time. So I think she's pretty decent. She's pretty decent. So tier 2 sounds about right to me, or tier 3 rather sounds about right. Could be a little bit lower, but I think that's pretty good. And then Vola Bear, and we will go ahead and end this and try to keep it under 40 if we can here in a few minutes. Vola Bear, you know, he can just run at people. He gets access to that backline as well with his ultimate, so that is pretty nice, kind of like Hecarim. But I just feel like, honestly, I don't know why his win rate's not a little bit higher. Maybe his numbers are just too low, right? Like, he just doesn't quite do enough damage. He's just not quite tanky enough with his abilities. He has been nerfed a lot, but once again, great Chem Tank Deadmans. You see this on like 90% of the champions I've mentioned. Just a super strong item. Now, if you do take Press the Attack, that is pretty handy because then your team gets to do that extra 10% or so damage to your targets. That is helpful. He's got a shield. He's got a little bit of healing. He's got a slow. I mean, he's just kind of got the whole kit. So I'm not really sure what's missing other than just like the numbers may not be right. But he certainly has the kit for it. He has the items. So, and there's several different things he can get. Although, once again, I think that Chem Tank Deadman's Thornmail is kind of where you want to be, unless you have to get Force of Nature because of Fiddlesticks or something. But last couple ones here. Olaf, I think, is going to take a step down. He was directly nerfed a couple of patches ago. There are extra grievous wounds options. More people are going to have that 60%. Like I mentioned before, you're going to have a hard time getting enough gold to really snowball and take over early. And you're just going to get outscaled, I think, by some of these other tanks. Maybe I'm wrong about that. It's totally possible. He should still be at least tier 2. I had him in tier 2 initially, and then I just thought it over a bit. His win rate dropped a lot. It dropped like 4% after the most recent nerfs, and I think he is kind of gold hungry early on. Like, both of these items are more than 3,000 gold. So he does have the true damage, and if you stand there and just, like, you know, have a punch out with him, he will knock you out. Like, he's still going to do a ton of damage. But I think that a lot of these movement speed champs with phase rush and all that are just going to dance circles around him and just ignore him in fights and just run straight for the back line. So I think he's going to get kited out more than he has in the past. And, you know, Jarvan, if Jarvan becomes more popular, can also dunk him. Now, he might kill Jarvan in that circumstance. Jarvan might just dunk him and flash out of it and just leave him in the pen. You know what would be an actually, like, a 5-head move is if you junked him, just dunk him with Jarvan R, and then just flag and drag your way out of it. I don't think I've ever seen Jarvans do that against, like, really dangerous melee targets, but that would be so hilarious, wouldn't it? Just dunk the Olaf and then just flag and drag out of there and just leave him in the pit for, like, 3.5 seconds. That'd be awesome. And just let, like, your 80 carries just gun him down. Okay, so anyways, I still think he'll be okay, but you're going to take a step down. Nidalee and Elise are really high skill cap, early game domination AP champions. So if we were talking like Masters Plus, I think they could be in the A or maybe even S tier. But they're very tempo oriented. You have to be ahead. You have to constantly counter jungle and pressure the enemy jungler. So it can work. I just think that it's just too risky. It's just too inconsistent in my mind compared to some of the previous picks. I'd rather just play a big tank of your choice with the Chem Tank Deadmans, but I still think that these two definitely have a lot of potential, even though Elise was nerfed. She still could be strong. Grogas, I don't quite understand why this guy is so, like, bad in statistically anyways in the jungle, because he's been picking up steam a lot in pro. People are playing him a ton. He's getting talked about a lot, but he has a pretty low win rate right now. It's like 51%, so it's not like impossibly bad. But people do build him AP, and this is just expensive, I think. He has an AP threat, which is nice, once again, to sort of force them off of the armor items. Kind of like what I was talking with Fiddle. But his win rate falls off pretty hard late game. I just feel like the tanks are just going to smash him. The Chem Tank stuff doesn't really seem to be that great on him, so I don't know. I feel like people build tanky stuff on him in the top lane, but in the jungle they build AP on him. So I'm not really sure. Maybe he deserves to be as high as tier 2, but statistically it's just not quite there. We'll do a couple more minutes, I guess. Then we have Shaco. So it requires a good chunk of items. I think the AP version is a little bit better in my mind. If you are extremely good on Shaco, it can work. He can get some early game ganks. He can totally dominate. He does have a good win rate, so, you know, he's kind of in, like, the Nidalee Elise sort of camp, I think. He's at his best when he's invading and, like, you know, really amping up the pressure in the early game, which that definitely, there's going to be opportunities for that, but I think that's a much more difficult play style than just, like, build tank and run at people, you know, and just kind of scale into late game where they can never kill you. So it looks like the AD version is a lot more popular right now. He does have that access to the backline, kind of like Kha'zix, where you can just assassinate the AD carry, you know, if they're not ready for it. So he definitely has a lot of potential, but he's one of the more challenging junglers to play out there. So I just got him a little bit lower, just because if you're not a one-trick, you may not be able to pull him off. But anyways, definitely has some potential to be strong. Eve, power farm to 6 is going to take longer. She needs gold for her items. She's pretty worthless early on. She's okay. Like, if you're able to take over, it's great. I just think that she's just too gold hungry. Rek'Sai's another champ, sort of in the Nidalee Elise camp, where if you're like Challenger or something, might be S-class, very good creative gank paths, excellent damage in the early game, just can completely destroy squishies if you're constantly able to counter jungle and get like some really successful ganks off, but falls off really hard late game if you're not ahead. So a little bit lower. Lee Sin, same kind of deal. Powerhouse in the early game, falls off pretty hard late if you don't take over. You do always have the chance for the playmaking miracle kick, but it's very hard to pull that off, and you're probably going to die if you try to do that. So he did get a buff either this patch or last patch. I think it was last patch. His Q went down by like 1 second, so that was nice, but still going to be fairly on the weak side. Echo needs a lot of gold, does have some baseline effectiveness, but I think he's a little more gold hungry than some of these other AP threat options early. Kane, he does power farm really well. I think that Red Kane might be able to still make it. There are going to be more Grievous wounds, which is a problem, obviously, but at least he has that knock-up for utility. So it's totally possible that it could work, but I think that he's going to get a bit weaker with these changes. Sejuani, the great tank of the past, has just been nerfed too many times, in my opinion. I have people ask me about her on stream fairly regularly. Her cooldowns are just way too high. I think like her Q, her charge is like 20 seconds at level 1 or something, and her damage is just too low compared to some of these other tanks, and her mobility is just not as great because her Q has such an obscene cooldown on it. So she's okay. She has a fantastic engage ability. It's just, you know, the modern day tanks with like just the mega speed, just like super uptime on their movement abilities and things like that are just going to outscale her. They're just going to be more powerful, in my opinion. The items on her just aren't that great. The items and runes aren't great, and her cooldowns are too high. Shyvana, like I said before, there's definitely a chance that she could be a little bit higher, although probably not by much. She doesn't bring a lot of utility to your team. She just straight up does a lot of range damage, which is nice if you're able to power farm and get a ton of items. Cosmic Drive's probably pretty good at some point on her, maybe like 3rd item, but I think it's going to take her a little too long to come online. Rengar can be very strong. I think he probably needs more items than Kha'Zix early, but I'm not 100%. If you're able to invade and beat up some of these champs, you know, you could do very well, but I sense that his matchup is probably not great into tanks, and there's a lot of tanks out there right now. Tanks in the jungle, and then in the bot lane, you've got stuff like Rel and Leona that are both like really top tier champions as well, and even stuff like Tank Maokai is a little bit more rare, but could be played into that. Then of course you've still got your Nautiluses, your Thrashes, and things like that. So I don't know. I think it's kind of rough. I think it's kind of rough out there for Rengar right now, but nerf to Tiamat certainly doesn't help either, or the change to Tiamat, I guess. But he just needs too much gold, too many items, and if you're a one-trick, he could work, but I think he's not going to be in a great spot. Zac is good as a tank, but you've kind of got one shot with your E, and if they're able to like roll and dodge away from it, then you kind of can't do anything for a little while. So I just think it's a little too inconsistent. Against like immobile champs like a Jinx or something, if you have the right angle and they don't see it coming, yeah, you might be able to get a really good engage. But so he does have that backline access, but I just feel like he might be a little just too conditional. And, you know, his main survivability is his healing. So with the 60% grievous wounds running around everywhere, that's probably not going to be good news for him. And then we've got Wukong, like, consistently underrated jungler. He's just underrated everywhere. I think this champion's, like, always decent if you're okay on him. But those items are going to be expensive. More grievous wounds, not good news for gore drinkers. Less experience, less gold in the jungle. It's going to take you longer to get to 6. It's going to take you longer to get your items. Both of these are very expensive. They're over 3,000 gold. You know, Death Stance over 3,000. He just does not have any cheap items that he can rely on. So I had to knock him down a little bit here. And then Vi, going to take you longer to get to 6. Your items are expensive. Like, you're really good when you hit 6 and you get your Divine Sunder or Trinity or whatever she's getting these days, but I just think you're just going to get destroyed by most of the tanks. And then Viego can be okay if you build him like some kind of Sterix build, Bruisery build, but I just think he's going to get slaughtered by the tanks. And then Karthus is going to be one of the biggest like falls, I think. I really wasn't a massive fan of this champion anyways. I think he can just be invaded and beaten up. But he does have a certain level of consistency with that ult, right? You're going to get kills at some point in the game. You're going to get some gold. I just think that it's just going to take you a lot longer to come online. And so I'm going to nudge him down a little bit. And the last few here, and then we'll call it a day. Graves is, you're still seeing him in pro. He can still be all right, but I think he just requires too much gold, too much farm, and just doesn't bring any utility to your team if you're behind. So... And he's one of the lowest win rate junglers out there. He's got like a 47 or 48% win rate, and he's not even that difficult mechanically. Like, there's some, you know, you got to keep your grit up, you got to get your auto attack resets and things, but I just think he's too inconsistent for most people, you know, outside of pro. And then Xin Zhao is a premier, you know, early game bully type of jungler. Level 2, get your red, go out, you know, just flash in, dash in, knock him up, try to kill him. So he's a really good snowbally bully type of champ, but I just think that he just falls off really hard. He's like a better ganking Olaf in the early game that doesn't duel as well as Olaf. Like, he still can fight pretty well. I think his power is just way too indexed towards the early game. If anything goes wrong, you're just going to die. Or if your team just throws in the mid game, you just lose a couple of fights, lose your momentum, you're probably going to lose the game. And then Amumu is like, okay, as I explained before, he did get a nice buff on this patch, but I still think he can be bullied early. His ultimate's not nearly as powerful as it used to be. His core items like Sunfire and Demonic Embrace have been nerfed, so I still think he's going to be in the gutter for the most part. Jax, just way too many items in the early game, just going to be able to get bullied out. Kindred requires too many items, difficult champion to play. You know, if you're a one-trick, you could make it work, but that's just not where I would want to be. Low utility, like the low utility, high damage, high gold requirement champions. I think they're all like significantly lower than where they were last patch. Same thing with Master Yi. Once again, if you get like 10 kills, he's going to be great, but otherwise, it's going to be really tough. It's going to be harder to farm. Malphite's okay. He just, I don't know. I mean, maybe he could even be in B tier because he does have a nice ult. He does get some of the tank items. I think there are probably better choices. Nocturne, going to take you longer to get to 6. You need a lot of items. To Leah, that nerf was really bad a couple of patches ago. It just feels like she cannot farm very well at all right now. Too much skill requirement. Yeah, I just don't think she's in a great spot. Maybe like B tier if you're pretty good on her. Warwick, Tiamat nerf hurt him. I just think they're going to be better tanks if that's what you're looking for. His items are kind of expensive. He really loves to get like Titanic. Which isn't great in the meta right now. Trundle, you would think, in theory, would be great against a lot of these tanks, but because they just have phase rush and so much movement speed, they just run around your pillar and don't really care, outside of maybe Nunu. And they're just going to run away from you whenever you ult them, a lot of the time, so I don't know. His numbers just aren't quite there. Well, Leah, you know, power farming, very gold-hungry champion, probably not going to be great. Maybe you still see her in pro. I think it's going to be a tough time. Pantheon, like one of the most overrated champions. If I had to pick a champ that's most overrated champ in Season 11, I would say it's Pantheon. He's just super indexed towards the early game, really doesn't do a ton. I just really am not a fan of that champion pretty much anywhere. Maybe jungle is one of his best roles right now, but I've just been disappointed by him a lot. And then Mundo, I think they're going to be better tanks. There's way more grievous wounds, tanks with more utility, all that stuff floating around. And then Twitch is great if you are like a challenger smurf trying to boost an account, but other than that, I wouldn't do it. Anyways, that's going to be it. Thank you very much. Have a good day, and we'll see you next time.